So there is a character in Daniel specifically that he makes a very, very short cameo, if you will, in chapter 11. Essentially, here's the quick breakdown. The kings of the north, the Seleucids or Seleucids, depending on how you want to put it, are constantly at war with the kings of the south, the Ptolemies. These two factions arose from the, I believe it's called the Diadoche, or the four quadrant groups split up from the former Alexandrian empire. So after Alexander died, it split into four from between its four generals. Two of these families, these generals' families, ended up one in charge of Macedon, essentially Greek and Greece and northern Thrace and all those places. The other ended up in charge of northern Africa, essentially crowning themselves as pharaoh, right? Very interesting story. There's a lot of historical background in there. Essentially, the back and forth all throughout Daniel 11 is, primarily anyhow, about these two families at war over the land of Canaan, essentially warring from the Tigris and Euphrates all the way down to, well, including Egypt, and who would have control and so on. Eventually, there's a peace. Cleopatra's involved. She was actually one of the offers of peace between the north and the south, right? Which is why it's funny that she's portrayed as dark skinned, because she was technically Greek. But anyhow, this king of the south is said to be the main, for lack of a better way to put it, bad guy that the king of the north, in this case Antichrist, or Antiochus as the historical antitype would represent, ends up being pretty profound, a pretty profound set of wars. Two wars in specific. One major war that occurs in northern Africa over the land of Egypt, as it's called. It's said to be a massive land battle, massive casualties, but essentially a draw thereafter. This war, by the way, takes place at the midpoint of the first half of the tribulation. So 3.5 years, 1 3/4 years in, boom, basically First World War, Third World War, depending on how you want to look at it, but First World War of the tribulation. And then there seems to be a temporary kind of a treaty thereafter. In Daniel 11, further on down, I think it's right around 11:30, there is a meeting between this king of the north and the king of the south, where they basically speak lies to each other, pretend like they're going to be at peace, and then the king of the south is said to make a massive thrust at the king of the north, whereas the king of the north is going to come back at him with ships, cavalry, machinery, essentially technology, and utterly wipe him out. Now, in Daniel 7 and 8, there is a picture of these kingdoms growing, and, you know, basically one coming out of another. Eventually, a little horn, the Antichrist, is said to come around, speak mightily, and boast, and essentially uproot 3 kings, right? And if we look back at the prophecy about Nebuchadnezzar and the statue, and the giant stone from heaven, the Lord, who comes and destroys all these kingdoms of man, the very last kingdom at the very end, the one represented by the crazy-looking beast in Daniel, I believe, 8 or 9, there's so much stuff. They're all about the same relative breakdown, the historical breakdown that ends in the end times with Antichrist being destroyed by Christ. 7 of these toes are made of iron. 3 of them are made of clay. The picture is that although they're described as being more numerous perhaps in personnel, that they are perhaps less technologically advanced and less capable in a warring sense. And that Antichrist is said to basically take over these 3 kingdoms and subsume them into his fully revived Roman Empire that is described as the beast rising up from the sea in Revelation, right? 10 horns on the beast. 3 of those horns are, again, uprooted by Antichrist via his wars with the king of the south. So I've often wondered who this king of the south could be. And the truth of the matter is, there's going to be some parallels, I think, between Antichrist and this king of the south. I think the biggest ones are going to be that because they both work for Satan, they're both going to be used for trickery. I think the Antichrist is going to be aware more of what Satan is doing versus the antitype of Antichrist, the king of the south. I believe that the Antichrist is going to call the king of the south the Antichrist, so as to add further to his false acumen, if you will, of him potentially being the actual Messiah. I also think that I think that they're both going to be morally degrading to a massive degree. I think obviously the Antichrist will have the trophy for most degrading, most demoralizing, and most morally debasing of the two. However, it's said in Islamic culture and Islamic writings that this person is supposed to bring all of the Islamic culture together because they're at war with each other. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but essentially all factions of Islam, some of them are incredibly different from others, all are basically like fighting cousins. They all disagree on many things, but they all agree that in the Quran, one figure is going to rise. In this case, I'm banking on it being this king of the south that they're going to call the Madhi. Comes together, brings all these sides of these factions and sects and whatnot together to war against the Christians and the Jews. Well, the Antichrist is Jewish and he's going to be the king of the Christians, right? So it only stands to reason that that's going to be their main focus. So I envision this Madhi being somewhat westernized. I envision him being, you know, probably about as morally sound, if you will, as the original prophet of Islam. We don't need to get into names or anything. I don't mean to be offensive, but the truth of the matter is there's some historical knowledge about the goings on of the originators of the Islamic faith that were not wholesome. And one figure really stands out recently, especially, and it's somebody that it really didn't strike me until just a few months ago. And I kind of said it, I think, in a funny way to my wife, but I was like, what if Andrew Tate is being set up to be the king of the South? He was made essentially a martyr by the exact same grand forces that will back the Antichrist. You know, all the banks, all of the Western governments, all of the news agencies and whatnot, they all kind of said the same things about him, right? But they also can't leave him alone. They can't just put him in the dustbin and let him, you know, flit away. Another thing that's very odd about this guy, and again, I don't claim to be a prophet. I don't claim to know these things. I did not hear a word from God. If this came from the Lord, I'll probably be the last one to know this. But his whole "the Matrix got me" thing was very much seemed contrived. And I know he perhaps is likely convinced of these things. You know, according to him, he became more faithful and more close to Allah and all these things after his imprisonment, his false imprisonment for whatever amount of time. I've also noticed that in general, the youth, especially the Islamic youth, the African youth, they're all very much kind of rallying behind him because he, in a lot of ways, holds on to a lot of the Western ideals that they see as possible, living a westernized type of life. But he also seems to meld some version of Islam to these, and I'm talking about the whoremongering. I'm talking about the debauchery. Let's put it that way. I'm talking about all of the things that basically allow for a young man who is, well, they're defecting from marriage. They're defecting from monogamy. They're defecting from all of the things that, unfortunately, Western culture and feminism and whatnot have made very, very unsavory for the majority of the youth these days. Let's be honest. The chances of somebody having a functional, like, godly, wholesome relationship with a woman is very, very low. It's not that it's impossible. There are Christians out there that can actually hold things together because they both hold the Lord, but I can see just from a cursory glance of what's going on socially regarding relationships that his whole appeal has to do with the fact that he is able to have his cake and eat it too, and still maintain, again, some semblance of being religious or holy in a sense. So I utterly understand his appeal. I understand that he has been made a martyr. It's been intentional, it seems. Let's be honest. Because he is somebody that quickly could have been just ignored and put to the side and taken off the platforms, but instead has been allowed to come back. He's been allowed to kind of creep back in. He's not even creep back in. He's come back full force, and he's just as popular as ever. And some of the things he say is pseudo-reasonable. It's pseudo-reasonable amongst an ungodly generation, right? People that don't want to know Christ, people that don't want to know a wholesome relationship, that don't want to experience, like, wholesome familial interaction. Yeah, I could totally see it, but you'd have to reject God, obviously. Somehow this is okay with the Islamic youth, and I'm actually starting to see imams and quote-unquote religious Islamic scholars back him and support him and basically give him kudos socially. So I'm starting to wonder, again, I don't know for sure, but I'm starting to wonder if he's not being set up to be this, he's not being set up to be the Antichrist. I don't know. Again, not a prophet, don't know everything, but I'm starting to get that feeling, just the same way I feel like Elon easily qualifies as somebody who could be the false prophet, that the way that Andrew Tate and his arrogance and his suppositionistic attitude and there's just a way about him that is being used specifically to garner a certain type of support so as to perhaps set him up potentially to be that fall guy. Who knows? Obviously, we're not many years away from the tribulation starting, so it would stand to reason that someone like him, if not him specifically, is going to start standing out as a very good candidate for this particular character, the King of the South. But time will only tell, I guess. Let me know what you think, guys. This is kind of one of those. It's one of those odd things that just strikes me kind of funny. And when I said it, I knew I was joking, but at once kind of made me go, The Antichrist needs a crusade. He needs, again, something to add to his resume, if you will, to Christians and people in the West. And he also needs it to be somebody that is popular enough and widely known enough so as to be supported en masse by the general Islamic population. And it's also clear, by the way, the reason why this stands funny to me is because those three kings that the Antichrist uproots that support the King of the South are said to be of one accord and to always be on the side of Satan with the goal of getting Antichrist in power. So them setting him up, allowing him to fail, basically is another way of saying throwing the entire Islamic world under the bus so as to be under the power of Antichrist. Wonderfully, the end result will be that a very, very good chunk of people, I'm sure, are going to run to Christ, though they may immediately pay with their lives because of it. But it does show that things are in motion and they're not slowing down. So anyway, food for thought, something to keep an eye out on. Maybe I'm crazy. Let me know what you think. Comment down below. I leave the comments on, by the way, guys, because I'm not against. I don't mind being challenged. You know, if I'm going to put myself out there, I feel like it's only right that I be able to be judged. But if I think you're wrong, you're going to hear about it, though. So share the video, like, subscribe, do all the things YouTube wants us to do. And I hope you guys are having a really good day, and talk to you soon.